So the first step in doing the migration of my blog is going to be migrating the grid. We're going to take the existing grid settings we had in Bootstrap 2 and move them to Bootstrap 3. So here in the index.html that we're working from, we can notice a number of different things are in here. We're going to come back and update the header a little later, so let me collapse that as well as the top. And we'll see that we're using some existing classes like container and breadcrumbs, and those are all working in the same way they used to. But when we come down into the main container for our blog page, we're seeing this row fluid. Now, if you remember, there is no more fluid support in Bootstrap 3, so we're going to want to make those changes. And a lot of the changes we're going to look at today, we're going to first do some search and replace, and then add some classes. So I'm going to first do a search and replace for row fluid and look for row. So let's replace that one, and we're going to replace it in the comment as well, just to be nice. And we'll do it here in the footer as well in the copyright. So at this point, we're changing the rows to the simply renaming of the correct one. Fluid-row doesn't exist anymore. Row continues to exist, and so we're simply going to change that one. If we go back up to the top, we're going to notice right away that we've got a left sidebar and a right sidebar, much like the example we built in modules 2 through 5. It's using the classes span to define the grid settings, and that is how Bootstrap 2 did it. For Bootstrap 3, we're going to want to replace these with the column MD declarations. So this is going to say that we want to use 9 grid columns, and then down here we want to do the same thing, column 3. And notice I'm replacing the spans with MD, with the medium-sized grid. And this is because the span most resembles what the medium-sized grid is. This means that if I'm using those spans and I go down to a smaller size screen, it is no longer going to show them side by side by default. It's going to stack them for smaller devices, which was the way that Bootstrap 2 worked. So if we save this file and go back here to the browser and just do a quick refresh, we're going to see we're now getting those grid columns defined. We're getting the 9 and 3 grids just like we had them before. We still have some visual things we need to fix here, but our basic settings of the grid are now being addressed. If we go to the footer, we're going to see we have 3 more spans that we need to change. We could have done this with a search and replace, but let's go ahead and do this here and say call MD4, MD4, and MD4. With this change in place, our footer now is using the 3 columns like we originally envisioned it. So we're starting to see that some simple changes to the CSS to move it to Bootstrap 3 can start to bring back our old look and feel of our website pretty quickly. Of course, in our case, what we want it to do when we resize this for a smaller screen size is up for debate. Because we only specified medium column widths, it's going to by default stack these, just like we saw before. So as we get to the larger size screens, it's going to support it having 2 columns, but as soon as we cross that barrier, we're going to see that it's simply going to stack these. Now for our sidebar, that's actually appropriate. But for our footer, I don't actually want this to be stacked. I only want this to be stacked when we're on phones. I would like on tablets for this to continue to show left and right, because we simply don't have that much content in each of these. So if we go back here to the editor, and let's go ahead and add small declarations for each of these, so that on a tablet size, we're still going to get the 3 columns, but it will fall back to on a phone-sized solution to going ahead and stacking them, because they're probably too small to be shown side by side on the phone. So we can see here in our full-size version, we're getting all of the medium size, but when we cross just into the small sized, we're still getting the 3 columns on the bottom, but we're getting the stacked sidebar because we're on a tablet, and that's probably appropriate. When we cross that further barrier into the phone size or smaller, it's reverting back to the stacked experience for very small devices. So the operation of converting the grid here is not only going to be including and converting spans to call MDs, but also possibly adding these new classes for the different screen sizes that you want to support. To make a quick search for span, and see we have a couple of others we can fix as well. Column MD8, and of course the problem with span is it's everywhere. Call MD9. And we could certainly fix these in the comments. I'm not going to bother for now. And there we have all of the spans converted to column MDs. You'll want to repeat this process if you have column offset. So offset 9 becomes col MD offset 9. We don't have any in our particular example, but you'll want to keep an eye out for offsets as well.